given to France during World War II, but Germany took over France before that event happened. So while we were not supposed to share these with the Canadians, we did park a bunch of these on the Canadian border, and mysteriously overnight they just seemed to vanish. We highly suspect that the Canadians were using them as a trainer. Staying on the right and behind there, that blue plane with 13 on it is a Vultee BT-13 Valiant, used by all branches of service to train pilots, but I guess from the time you started the engine until you shut it off, the plane vibrated so violently that, of course, it got the nickname the Vultee Vibrator. And then the silver plane here on our left. This is a Lockheed Constellation, but it is an historic aircraft, and we'll talk about the Connie in its own right in just a few minutes, but this particular plane was used by Dwight David Eisenhower when he was a five-star general and leader of Supreme Headquarters Allied Forces in Europe. He named it the Columbine after the state flower of Colorado. That was Mamie, his wife's adopted state. Became president. Liked this plane so much that he brought another one into the service and called it the Columbine II. Then he brought a stretch version of the Connie with a longer fuselage. If you haven't already figured it out, he called that the Columbine III. Very clever with those names. Now, Eisenhower was the first president to utilize the helicopter off the White House grounds. One of the helicopters he used is over here on our left. This is a Sikorsky in Army coloration. This plane actually was at one time belonged to the Marine Corps, but I, being in the Army, got it painted up in Army coloration, and of course had an Army crew on board as well. Later on, you can, if you so desire, you can walk out here and look through the windows and kind of envision Ike and his wife Mamie flying off to Camp David. It was in the special missions section of the government. We call it Freedom One because after the Iranian hostage situation ended in the early 80s, that very plane was flown over to Germany, picked up the former hostages. The story has it they were flying back, and once they penetrated our airspace, the air controllers referred to it as Welcome Back Freedom One. And it adopted that call sign one other time. That was after the Gulf War in '91. That plane flown over the Sun and using that call sign Freedom One. Another plane used in the presidential fleet coming up on our right. Douglas VC-118, actually the military equivalent of the very famous commercial airliner, the Douglas DC-6, used from the mid-40s until sometime into the 60s. But this particular plane, used by Kennedy and Johnson from 61 through 65, if we turn time back, Kennedy had a jet at his disposal in the early 60s, but not all airfields would accommodate jet aviation. So Kennedy chose this out of the Air Force inventory. Jacqueline Kennedy, his wife, got together with a famous industrial designer and put that paint scheme on there. Put the United States of America on the side to represent all the people of the states, not a particular branch of the service. As that plane stands right now, it's Air Force in the tail number 3324. Might have influenced the design. In that, Howard wanted a plane that could be completely housed inside a hangar for maintenance purposes. And with the original design, it had a single tail that was too tall to do so. Supposedly, Lockheed accommodated his wishes by putting that tri-tail on there. The plane you're looking at is the 10th one off the production line, and we think it's the oldest Connie in existence. Mid-60s until 2005 when it was phased out of service. It loads through the rear and it could carry the long components of the Minuteman missile. Anytime you see anything spruced up here at the museum, it's a tribute to what they do out there. Nothing usually happening on Saturdays, and it is off limits to you. You see the big stop sign there. We do have armed guards that take care of you if you do cross that stop sign, so please do not try and go back there. And the first one's coming up on the, well, both of them will be on the right, but the first one is one of 5 modified Boeing C-135s that was used in the weightless training of astronauts. And as we roll up near the nose section, you're going to see a profile of the mission painted on the nose section, where they would go up to altitude and they would pick up about 500 miles an hour, start a climb, Get to the top of the climb, they'd pull the power off and push the nose over. At that point, you became weightless for about 30 or 40 seconds. The nose would drop down. They'd pick up airspeed again and do that again. You saw earlier. This one, these were used by the National Space Agency to bring the components of the space program from their manufactured site to the launch pad. And the way it loads, you see those nodules on the side there, those are hinges, and at that juncture, this entire nose section rotates out about 120 degrees, exposes about a 25-foot diameter cavity. Quite well, didn't pass up any gas stations, and real difficult to land in any type of crosswind. Way on the right, you'll see a Lockheed P-3 Orion. Those are still being used by the Navy as a maritime patrol aircraft. Some of those used to penetrate hurricanes, but they've been used for the last 40 years by the Navy. Strategic Air Command by the plane here on our left. This is the Boeing B-52. B-52 came out in the early 50s, and later models are still being flown by the Air Force's Strategic Air Command. Has 8 engines, and the speed's up to about 650 miles an hour. This first one is one of 2 A models that was modified for use in the X-15 rocket ship program. That X-15 rocket ship was carried aloft in that saddle on the wing next to the fuselage. It was about 2 to 2.5 times the length of that saddle. So they would carry the X-15 up to altitude, they would launch it, and it would go on its runs depicted by those decals. Up on our left, painted up as it might have been seen over the skies in North Vietnam in the late 60s, early 70s. Now the B-52 has a very flexible wing. If the wing were full of fuel and this fuel cell near the tip of the wing were full of fuel, that tire would be on the ground. But during flight, as it loses fuel, that wing lightens up and flexes upward to the extent that the tip of the wing from its low point to its high point has 32 feet, not 3.2, but 32 feet of flexibility. And then flat. We have another trainer, this white plane with 814 on it is a North American T-2 Buckeye, used by the Navy and Marine Corps until sometime into the early 2000s to train their pilots. Another Navy and Marine Corps trainer coming up on the right, this one to do some of the real basic training, the North American T-28 Trojan during Vietnam. Beautifully restored by restoration in Swiss coloration on our right is a British plane, the Hawker Hunter, plane that the British used from the 50s into the 70s. Swiss continued to use them well into the 90s. This is a Convair B-58 Hustler, plane that was developed to deliver our nuclear warfare before we had the reliability of the intercontinental ballistic missiles. Came out in 1959. At that time, it was the hottest thing in the skies. Mach 2 or about 1,500 miles an hour. Pod on the center line had a 2-fold function. Gas in the outer shell. Dropped that shell off. Provisions for 3 nuclear weapons there. Stations on the wings so they could carry 4 more nuclear weapons. In the Korean War in the early 50s, open those front doors. That's where the engine is, rather than right under the rotor where you would typically find it. Then we have 2 Bell helicopters, the next 2 ground ones. Mid-60s are Vietnam era to current usage on them. The little one is a light observation helicopter used by the Army, the Navy for rescue as well as anti-submarine warfare. Air Force painted theirs all green and referred to as the Jolly Green helicopter. Then the dark brown and the dark blue helicopters are both Piasecki design helicopters. Same size rotors at the front of the training helicopter, the Bell Sioux. This one on loan from the Navy, and no, that's not the rotor on top there.